Hi, thanks for joining Life and Times. My guest today is Joe Warchawsky. And Joe, you were born here. Tell me what you remember of the years growing up here, which would be when?
I was born in 1955, and I spent most of my childhood and everything in Fernie and around the Annex area. And the areas like that we're sitting in right now, there was always lots of fields, and lots of people would cut the hay by hand, and everything was pretty loose. And there was, in each area of the community, there wasn't very many vehicles, so the people would, a lot of areas had dumps in them. And I remember this area in particular where this house was, so probably end of the 50s to the 60s, there was quite a few bachelors in Fernie, and one of the bachelors that lived here, his name was, never knew his last name, but we called him Social Credit Frank for some reason. I have no idea why, but he would talk to inanimate objects, and as kids we would laugh because it was funny to watch, but now if I look back I think how lonely he must have been.
Oh yeah.
But they, a lot of the places that I talked about there would be lots of cans, empty tin cans, and people would just bring them in their wheelbarrow. At the end of this block there's like a pumping station, and there was actually a big tree there, and it overlooked the dump, and we used to swing out on ropes over the dump and come back because it was a bank, so this was all a big pothole.
Because the tree is gone. There's
the
no
tree's
tree
gone.
here.
Yeah, the tree was where somewhere about that pump house. And this field here, like I said, is just a big field. And hardly any cars, hardly any houses. Closest house to this one is there's a house across the corner, and that belonged to LeBlanc's. So like the McKinney family was raised there, and then after Mrs. LeBlanc married, she married a LeBlanc, but she was probably married to a McKinnon before that.
So you were born and raised in this area called the Annex,
Yeah.
which at that time didn't belong to the city of Fernie, right?
No, we were part of they called us the Annex Extension, but the cutoff would have been 11th Street was the cutoff. So on the south side where Salvador's lived, that was the city of Fernie, and where I lived across the street was like a regional district, we'd call it today.
Oh really? Like from one side of the street to another?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So there was hardly any houses. There was, everybody had animals. I remember my father raised rabbits, New Zealand whites. They were a meat rabbit, chickens, geese. My mother liked goat's milk, so we had goats. And people would, my dad would sell the rabbit, I think, for 2 bits a rabbit.
Wow. 2 bits a rabbit. Wow.
So everywhere around here was lots of water, and we would play in the 60s, we would play in the water lots. And underneath 9th, what we call 9th Avenue, that long time ago that was the old highway. And it used to go and then cross by 15th, used to cross the Elk River. But I think in around 1948 that whole bridge got wiped out because it was a huge flood. So, but underneath there was culverts, big culverts, stone culverts, and we would travel on rafts from where bachelors live, which are what would be there now, McDonald's and Independent.
Yeah.
We could travel from there on rafts all the way into the Annex Pond here because there was that much water.
Now, I remember in the 50s, a friend taking us kids on the highway, and everything on the side, going north, and we were looking down, and the river was almost to the road. It was, it was flooded so much. There was so much water, and I always recall, because the friend that took us for a ride owned 4 lots down there, and he eventually let them go because he said they're always flooded to the highway. And I often wondered if that was something that I imagined, because I remember it so clearly, that area being flooded.
There was down, say down to the west of us here, the water was really close, and we would, the water came up a road allowance. And the only house down there was a lady by Mrs. Ashmore was her name, so like Teddy and Howie Ashmore's grandmother, I would think. So, and Mr. Perkins is his wife. That was her mother too, and she lived by herself. She was close to the river, but none of it looked like it did. I mean, the dikes never came till Borsman put them in.
Yeah, and that was in
late 60s,
was
early
it 60s?
70s.
70s, yeah.
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 And they it flooded all the time. That's what I get a kick out of. They talk about the water table now. The water was all around us before. It was, you didn't go certain places in the spring.
Mm-hmm. What was here in the annex? I remember a store. It used to be Lamar, but before that it was Saric's.
Sarich.
Yeah,
and then across from that there was a restaurant.
Wasn't there a meat market too at one
Mary,
point?
before that was Mary's and Sophie's. It was like a restaurant, and then Walter Wills, I think later on, bought the building, and he had the butcher shop in.
Right.
Because I think he used to cut meat up by where Ferrello's was. Him and I want to say Mike Wasnock.
Yeah, I think you might be right.
Because then the other butcher shops were uptown where the Browns is naturally, and across was the Maffiolis.
Mm-hmm. But you're right, because Fiorillo's store was on the corner of 9th and 4th, and right next to it was another butcher shop.
That was a butcher shop.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure.
I remember.
No, I don't know if Walter was there, but Mr. Wasnock, I think, was.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the other fellow, but I kind of remember Ferrello's store too. There was all wooden planking in there. And
Yeah, you're right. On the floor and on the walls even.
And they had big display cases. You could walk in there.
Yeah.
Sarich's was a mom and dad business, and they ran. You'd go there. Everybody had kind of like credit. I remember we'd go for cigarettes for Mrs. Zuffa, Rosie Zuffa, and she would send us for cigarettes, and we would go there and pick stuff up. And he was always good to the kids, like he was good to us, but it was different.
all the shops in Fernie, since I remember the 50s and 60s, maybe even into the 70s, gave credit.
Credit was common.
Yeah.
I remember going on a weekend. We'd go on a Saturday. Saturday was a big deal. My dad was heading up to get a good seat in the beer parlor by about 10 in the morning, because all them guys drank. There was 8 bars and they were full.
Yeah.
And we would go uptown for groceries, and then we would go to the grill for lunch, which was a big deal. My mom would have the groceries sent home, and she'd leave the door open, because if she left it outside, the dog would eat the groceries. So they brought everything in the house. Nobody's house was really locked around here.
No.
And they gave credit, you're right, and they were very generous that way, but the people felt obligated to pay, so I never knew anybody to not pay. But what I do remember about the downtown, there was lots of bachelors here. There was lots of single men, and they lived all around the downtown, and there was more apartment blocks.
Well, all the stores downtown had apartments up on top, remember?
Yes, the families.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So downtown was always busy.
It was busy, yeah. I remember coming Halloween, and then there was, we would go downtown because we knew all the bachelors would give us change. They used to have quarters or dimes or nickels or whatever, and they give you a change. You'd go there and, you know, we'd take our pillowcases and we'd go downtown, and we'd have probably just as much coinage as we did candies or apples. But they were all, that's what they had, right?
Mm-hmm. Do you remember what downtown looked like?
Oh, yes.
There was some empty spots down there too, I remember, in the
Down by
50s,
the-
60s.
Down by the theater there was,
Yeah,
big empty spot.
right.
Um,
Across from where the theater is, and on the corner was the Grand Central Hotel.
yes.
And across the road, that was bare.
Yeah, there was nothing
Yeah.
there. The nuance, the new buildings, you can tell because of the design in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Napanee was the one that burned.
Yeah. And the
Yeah.
Kings next to it, remember?
Kings, yeah. And then the Queens was farther down the tracks towards where you lived. So closer to...
Where Save On Foods is now.
Exactly.
Because I had a school friend who lived, she and her mother lived in the Queens.
And lots of single people lived there.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think...
And I think that was a 4-story building, if I remember correctly.
I remember staircases.
Yeah. Because in the summer, my friend would sit outside when it was so hot on the stair, on the iron stairwell.
I remember the iron.
Mm-hmm. But where Save On Foods is now, there was a garage.
Yeah, it was called
It was a
Fernie
Ford,
Garage.
wasn't it? Fernie Garage?
Fernie Garage, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
And across the road, there was nothing. It was empty.
Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
No. There,
And in the next block, the only building was the Miss Barton's studio, or Miss Barton's record store,
yeah, that's
and
where
the bakery.
That's where the ski base is.
Yeah. No, the other one, the Guide's Hut.
Guide's
is there.
Hut,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then past the bakery was the In-Towner.
Yeah, so like,
But in between, it was empty too. And across the road, it was all empty as well.
well,
There
the
was,
King Edward was across the road.
further down, but before that, it was empty.
Across from the In-Towner was King Edward,
Yeah.
and that burnt down
Yeah,
too.
and that was a
didn't it?
beautiful building.
Yeah.
I remember.
Polmark's owned it.
Is that who owned it?
That's what I remember.
My
Yeah.
mother worked in the kitchen
Mhm.
making salads and desserts, and I remember going there every once in a blue moon. And the first time I ever had apple pie was there, and I had never had apple pie, and I remember how good it tasted.
Yeah.
I don't think that any apple pie I've ever tasted since that flavor was replicated, but probably because it was the first time I'd ever had it, right?
Yeah. The other thing I remember, like on Saturday was a big day, and everybody, some people worked on Saturday, but everybody was off Sunday.
Yeah.
Sunday was that way. But Saturday there would be a lot of us kids. We'd go for groceries or whatever. We'd end up eating at the grill because they had
At the Diamond Grill.
Diamond Grill because they had Boston cream pie. That was the
Yeah.
biggie.
It was thick like this.
Yeah. Well, it was probably bigger than we were. And then I remember many of us would go to show. My mother would join my father, but he would have to go with her. They had ladies and escorts, so they'd go there. And then we would go there, go to the show, and then some of the guys, there was all sorts of kids downtown. And we would, is that a stop?
Nope.
No, we can
Oh.
keep going.
So there was lots of kids downtown. I remember we would pester Jack Minton, would go read all the comics, we wouldn't buy anything, and he'd kind of put up with our stuff. And then you'd usually go by the beer parlor, and I'd let my mom know where it was, but I would have to, the Polmarks, or even we'd go from there, go to Fernie, and they drank in the Royal too. So most of the lobbies had kids in them.
Mm-hmm.
And they put up with us, but it was like steeplechase around there. Us guys would run around the whole hotel.
Okay, we'll take a little break. Hi, we're back. You know what I wanted to ask you, Joe? You went to the Saturday matinees, right?
Yes.
Do you remember how much it cost?
I believe we got in for 25 cents.
Yeah, I was thinking it was a quarter.
And I believe that you could get a bag of popcorn and you could get a pop.
For 10 cents.
10 cents.
Yeah, okay.
And then sometime you bought licorice too.
I just remember 25 and 10, and I recall because the matinee started at 2.
Yeah, Weber's owned the theater then.
Oh, okay.
And then later on, Mr. and Mrs. Clark took it over, so that would be Marilyn Clark's parents. Marilyn
really?
Earl's
Earl. Mhm.
parents.
Oh, I did not
And
know that.
he ran a billiard hall below the theater, which was another hangout when we were teenagers in the 70s.
I never knew that because my father didn't allow us girls to go anyplace.
There was no girls. There was
It's just the guys, eh?
just
Boys.
pretty well guys, very few
Mhm.
girls. Even like I remember going to school in the 60s, the boys played on one side and the girls played on the other. And I was talking to Joy Roussel about this, and I says, do you remember, I says, when the boys were only allowed to go to one place to play and the girls played in the other? And she says, yeah, it was real.
Hmm.
Yeah, you were not dreaming that, she said.
Well, even when I started school, it was the girls came in from the back, the 3rd Avenue entrance, and the boys came in through the 2nd Avenue entrance. And so we lined up, the girls all lined up in the what was considered the back door
Yes,
of the school, and the boys were in the front.
yeah.
That was in the middle 50s.
Yeah, it's 60s replicated that. We all went to the same school naturally. There was what stuck in my mind about the school was that how many kids would stick their tongues on the metal gates.
Really? I thought that was only in the movies.
No, there were stupid kids actually.
You know, I remember that school so well. I imagine that it was finished by the time you started school, but in the year you were born, that I was in school, I remember we would all go into that big hall that was there, you know, the back and front entrance led into this big hall where classrooms were in different corners. But we would gather there, it was like assembly now, and we would recite Our Father, we would sing O Canada, and we would sing God Save the Queen.
That continued.
Did it?
Okay. I remember all of that. I remember classrooms some of the classrooms were in the basement.
Yes, I remember that, because the basement was really kind of a dreary, scary place.
Well, it was. And it was, but really warm. You gotta remember the big boilers.
True, it was warm.
It was warm.
You're right, it was warm, but it was dreary.
Yeah, anybody that had any size to them would get hurt down there, though. The ceilings were so low.
Yeah, they were low, you're right, although, you know, as a kid I was short.
Yeah.
So, but I remember that school really, really well. I can picture it in my mind, that stairwell,
On second.
Yeah, the one going from the back that went up to the bell tower, and
Yeah.
it was beautiful wood. It must have been ash, and it had the beautiful round, curved going up the stairs. And then in the front, they had wood staircase as well, which
Off third.
off 2nd and 3rd.
Yeah.
Inside though.
Mhm.
And then they changed it to metal, which I never can understand why. There was a time when they thought that skinny metal railing was better than that beautiful natural wood curved stairwell.
I think maybe they lost sight.
Yeah.
They lost sight of what was beautiful, and the people that were making decisions at the time probably thought metal was a new nuance, and we should get rid of what was.
Well, look what they did to the outside, right?
Made
Covering that beautiful brick with white stucco and that huge, huge yellow
The Atco trailer.
border.
The Atco trailer.
That's exactly what it was. It looked like an Atco trailer.
White
yeah.
and yellow, yeah.
Yeah, No, and they took out the beautiful bell tower.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the school building was a gorgeous building.
Yeah, I remember, and the head of each department had their own little office.
Mm.
That's what I remember, like, English department, Mr. Hamilton, he had on second floor.
Mm-hmm.
His office was on the north end of the building. I remember the chemistry teachers, they were at the other end, so they would have been on the south end. But that was kind of a new part of school, I can remember, because the
Because they did build
staircase
that
was
science
concrete.
part on 9th Avenue.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
the home ec and
Was in the far,
far end towards
Closer.
the office.
yeah, closer to the gym.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I,
Do you remember some of the teachers?
I remember most of the teachers actually that I had. I had Mrs. Trugra, Mrs. Campbell, Mrs. Corrigan, Mrs. Strotter, Mrs. Watson, and then I got Joe Gelati. I thought I died and went to heaven. He was the only one that didn't wield a pointer, a yardstick like a samurai warrior.
He was a good teacher. He was a
Yeah.
caring teacher.
Yeah. Who else was there? Mr. Grove White, Pete Caulfield, naturally.
Yeah. Mr. Caulfield was my chemistry teacher, science teacher.
Yeah.
And I always remember him because in grade 10, he was on the second floor, and I remember looking out. It was a nice, beautiful spring day, and it was sunny, and instead of paying attention, I was looking out the window because Nick was going by with his 62 blue Chevy. And I remember looking, and all of a sudden Mr. Caulfield saying, "Miss Ayalo, you want to pay attention here?" And I remember that in the yearbook, the kids doing the yearbook put on there that, you know, Mary's interest was in looking out the window at 1962 blue Chevys. Yeah, those are great memories.
Yeah, that's ironic because your nephew liked that year's Chevy, 60, 61, 62, Tony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he liked Chevys too.
Yeah.
But I remember Mr. Simcoe, which I don't know if he was there.
Alfie, he was the
Yeah.
librarian. He used to bang with his finger
Yeah,
over your head.
he
read
had a
the
really
book.
long finger.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I loved Mr. Simcoe. The kids would make fun of him, and he would get upset and he would point his finger. But he was a great guy.
Mhm.
And the Mr. Oh my goodness, who was the principal at that time?
Norman Gill and Mr. Stewart.
And Creamer before that.
Kramer, I
Yeah.
didn't have, Kramer maybe was in elementary.
Uh-huh.
I had,
Well, because the school was kindergarten to grade 12, and at one time grade 13 as well.
there
So-
was no kindergarten when I was in school. Kindergarten came after.
I think you're right. I don't think there was kindergarten even when I went to school. It was just a grade 1, grade 2.
Grade
Yeah,
1, yeah.
you're right. Mm-hmm.
Because there wasn't that many kids. There was, if you think about it, there wasn't a lot of kids going to that school. Like the grad classes, if you look at by the numbers, there wasn't.
Yeah, some of them in the beginning, in the 40s and 50s, were very few, like 20. In the 60s, it increased.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was closer to the 80s, and then it got even more.
More so when Kaiser amped
Yeah.
up. Because then the people came here from
Mhm.
Anacoquin and Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
Their areas were depressed by that part.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember some of the shops that were in Fernie in the 50s and 60s?
By shops.
You know, like stores that were
Oh yeah.
on Main Street.
So there was 2 shoemakers.
Oh, that's right, there was.
Yeah.
There was Ralph
Ralph Lento,
Lento.
and then at the other end down
Missisco,
by the
Mr. Missisco.
by the Vogue, where Vince Menifee has
Yeah,
his.
that was the Missisco building.
Yeah, and then there was couple barbers. There was across from the King Edward. On
That was Patsy Carvetta and
no,
Turner.
I'm thinking about D'Amico.
D'Amico. Wow, I don't remember him.
He had they had like a potbelly stove in there, and I'd
And
go in.
where were they situated?
D'Amico was across from I gotta think, the street we were going to close down for our square. Use
6th?
6th.
On the side street.
On the side street. The old building's still there, and they got bars on it.
Okay,
But
I
we'd
was
go-
picturing that. That's
we're-
behind where right now the edge of the sports store is situated.
I think that store there was like Sears or Eaton's when I was growing up.
It was also a drugstore for a while.
Yeah, I think I remember going in that building and would put on our catalog orders. I remember going with my mother.
Lance Edwards is in the store now, but the back is not open, and it's got the bars. You're right, on the outside.
That's where the D'Amico's barbershop was. Then Patsy Carvetta was across the other side of 2nd.
On the corner.
And Doug Turner was there, yeah.
For a while then, they went into the building that used to be the, what did I say it was called? It was a gas station in town area.
Yeah, had a
they
gas
had a room
bar.
in there. Yeah, they were there. When they retired, that's where they retired from.
But right now where Wally was the barber
Yeah,
shop.
but that's where
on
it started. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right.
Yeah. And I don't remember any other barbers
No.
downtown. I remember Dr. Campbell, naturally,
Hmm.
and quite a painful experience going to see him no matter what.
For everybody.
Yeah. And the doctors, I remember McCritchie, LaRue, and East, and I remember you could go get your teeth pulled in the doctor's office.
Yeah.
And you'd hold on to the wooden chair. And I remember McCritchie's office being across from Big Bang Bagel.
Yeah, on the corner.
On the corner.
Yeah, where the coffee roaster is going in right now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And next door was the drugstore,
Jack Mittens.
and then there was Ray Hell's, and then there was Marshall Wells, and then there was Robinson's. Remember Robinson's?
Yes, I do. And then there was bowling alley.
Yeah, yeah.
Where the ski base is.
Yeah, that's right. And across the road was Quails and Trites Woods.
Trace Woods was pretty well took up the whole block.
Yeah, yeah,
In between
Mhm.
where the museum is
Yeah.
and the bank.
yeah, the bank, and then
What
there
we
was the
call a
bank.
brick
and-
house.
Yeah, and then on the other side, there was the bank, another bank, and the Diamond Grill, and the Northern,
Yeah, Northern's been a mainstay.
yeah, and
What-
the BJ shop.
Wasn't that the Quail? Billy
uh,
Quail and
The Northern?
No.
No, next.
BJ.
Yeah, it was one of the, no, it was one of the Ray Hells.
Was it real?
Yeah. And then next door was MC Cash, which was another Ray Hell, wasn't he?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
They were probably from Beirut too,
Lebanon.
Lebanon.
And across the road was the Waldorf.
Yeah, which was, by my time it had been burnt already, and you could still drink, the guys were drinking in there, and then it burnt. And then for many years it was just black.
And there was a white spot next to them too. I remember the
Yeah.
white spot.
And then it became, didn't it become a furniture store? No, the Waldorf became a
Mhm.
furniture store.
Yeah.
Yeah, Gallmer's owned the white spot,
Yeah.
didn't
And next to that was Mabel's Cafe and the shoe store. And there was a hairdresser on that street as well. I remember the town really well as a kid,
Mhm.
because my mother always took me shopping with her to be the interpreter for everything.
Well, that Saturday was a big day here,
Mm-hmm.
huge day. Sundays, nothing, you better get your stuff on
Yeah, because
Saturday.
everything was shut down.
Yeah.
You know, memories of Main Street maybe not for everybody, but for me, because I've been lived here almost my entire life, and certainly you have, maybe they mean more to us than they do to newer people, but for me, because we didn't have a camera, and so I didn't take a lot of photos back then, the memories in my head are really vivid, and so when I hear somebody else talking about it, or if I see photos, it's really meaningful to me. Does it affect you like that, Joe?
In many ways, the more that I talk about it, I think about going to, Mr. Lento used to sharpen all our skates and stuff like that, and I remember going in there and there'd be a whole battery of different polishers, and you'd see the belts running. Everything was wide open. You could easily lost your finger in the business he was doing, and I remember them making different leather work, and they would resole the boots. I remember a lot of the guys would get a good pair of boots, and if they worked in the wood industry, they had corks in them, but they would I don't know if they could reattach the cork, but they'd rebuild the sole for a lot of the followers.
Yeah.
That's what I remember. I only remember one bakery in Fernie, and only when Tippy owned it.
Oh, yeah?
But
Because I think that bakery building was there from the early, after the town burnt up
my dad
in
worked
1908.
My dad worked as a butcher for the Casimir brothers, and I think they called it the 41 Meat Market. And that's, and then I think after that became a bakery, and the Hunter family, I think, had it, which would be like Mrs. Lalonde was a Hunter,
Oh, I
like
didn't
Lalonde's
know
mom,
that.
I think.
Hmm.
Yeah, there was I remember a lot of the bachelors, they would all had nicknames, and they were all pretty nice to us kids, and each one was so distinct in his own way. Like, there was a big heavy fella from the North End, his name was Eddie Borsick, but they called him Hujo,
Yeah.
because he was built like a barrel.
He was like a little Humpty Dumpty. He
Yeah.
spent a lot of time at my house.
He would carry I remember he'd give us guys piggyback rides. We could see how many kids we could get on his shoulders, and that he would walk with us, and it was
He
fun.
was actually a very kind-hearted person.
Well, to put up with us kids, he had to be.
Yeah.
I remember a fellow by the name of Bill Polensky. He was a big, tall, lanky fella, and where Jerzaks live now, he lived in that house. He was a bachelor.
Ah.
And he would play a game with us. He had big feet. He would throw dimes down. If we could get the dime before he stepped on our fingers, we could have the dime.
Oh my goodness. Do you remember who Eddie's dad?
No.
Who was tall and skinny? I mean, Eddie was honestly like a little round Humpty Dumpty.
He was
Yeah. And short. And
Yeah.
his dad was tall and thin like a bean.
I don't remember his dad.
Yeah, and his dad was not a very friendly person. He was always, because they lived only a door down, and then when my dad purchased the house next door and turned it into a garage, they were the next door neighbors. And Eddie often would come over Sundays and have dinner with us, because my mother always made pasta with meatballs and ribs for Sunday dinner. And so she often, I think she felt sorry for him. He worked at the mill, and my dad knew him, and they had no other family.
Yeah. The Knights Lumber Company, what you're talking about, I remember there was, and I keep going back to this, lots of bachelors, like their Jumbo was a Chinese fella.
And do you remember Jumbo?
I remember because my dad worked at Knights.
Did he give you lifesavers?
He would give us that, yeah.
Lifesavers. I never knew lifesavers until Jumbo gave us lifesavers. He always would give us a roll, a brand new one, or else he would give us a quarter sometimes. He was very good. But when I got older, I had a conversation with him, and he, by older I mean when I was 15, 16, asked him where was his family, and he said they were back in China. He said he had a wife and 5 children, and he was working and sending all his money to them, and he lived, I don't know if you recall, he lived in that shack on the premises of where the mill was, which the mill was across the road where the city yards are and where JT's and the New Horizons and the cement plant, and that was all mill. And he lived in absolutely pitiful surroundings and sent everything to his family, and I don't think he ever made it back because he died.
He died, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember this as being cruel or not cruel, but I remember him showing a picture when I was there, because my dad would have a couple pigs at Waswick's, and we'd naturally go see Jumbo. And what I remember of his place was the floor was dirt.
Yes.
I remember dirt floor.
Yep.
And I remember we would go there, and he showed this picture in particular, and when my dad was still alive, I remember talking to him about some of them guys and bachelors, I remember. And he says, you know, Joe, he probably had 8 kids. He'd show us pictures, but he wouldn't have been there for the last 3 or 4. So he was, who knew what was real and who knew what was what, but he says it didn't matter. The Casimir brothers most of them were bachelors. And they
lived on this, just down the street on the corner. They had 3 houses.
3 houses, yeah.
Yeah, on the corner, so Steve was in the first one, Joe was in the second one, and Henry, who was in bed with an illness, was in the third one. Because I remember my mother and I would go over there and feed him chicken soup, homemade chicken soup.
My dad told me he got an inoculation during the war and crippled him up.
Oh, is that what happened?
And then Andy lived in that house after
Andy
he died.
Too. Yeah.
But he was in bed. I vaguely remember him, but Paul Casimir was the only one that was married, and he lived beside you.
Yes, after I got married and bought a house, I bought a house next door to Paul Casimir, so I lived close to the Casimirs all my life.
We would go we'd go visit the Casimir family. And cause my dad and Stevie and all them guys like drinking wine, and Pete Moore and Bill Sukach and Casey.
Well, Steve was the foreman at the mill.
Yeah.
And so, you know, for an immigrant person, your foreman was somebody you really respected. And so my dad always went out of his way to do things, you know. So this is why my mother and I would go and feed Henry, or we would bring food to Steve and Joe and Andy. And I have to tell you this, in the second house, in the porch, because before you went into the kitchen, there was a small porch, there was a washer, and you know, those round tub washers.
I'll show you one at the house again.
It was never moved, but I remember one day going in there, and my mother and I, and we looked in, the lid was off, and the tub was filled with cooked spaghetti. It was cold, and there was no sauce on it, but it was cooked spaghetti. And I remember we just laughed because we thought, oh, these poor old single guys cooking spaghetti and putting it there and probably eating it cold.
Yeah, we would go, I remember going there with my dad. And Andy, I thought, I didn't pay attention, he wore glasses all the time, but he had no glass in him. And he was trying to teach me how to play the piano, because he was, with the arts, he was considered quite a good dancer and a musician in his own right, like Boswell, remember Jimmy Boswell? Another bachelor, by the way, right? So Andy was showing me something on the piano, and I remember laughing so hard because he stuck his finger and rubbed the top of his eye through the lens. But I found out after he had his hearing aids
In them.
in them.
Now we got to remember that he and Paul were the ones that worked at the Free Press and did.
They set press.
They set the press, and I'll never forget one time they said, "You want to come down and have a look?" And I said, "Sure." And it was so impressive because it was huge machinery, and the way they have to do the printing with each letter on a square and put it all in, it was such an art. I had such respect for Andy and Paul for being able to do that and print out those newspapers on time, and it was such painstaking work. It was really quite amazing. Actually, those that whole family, there was a lot of them, and some of them were married, but the ones that were in Fernie that were single, they were a very clever, really talented group of guys.
What I remember most was, like, I remember Joe because I remember I would work on their cars. They had them coupes and stuff like that, and they would let me work on them, which was fine. But Joe was supposed to be quite a baseball player in his own right. He was,
Yeah.
But you know, after a while, I think the alcohol got the best of them.
But they were nice guys.
Yeah, they were all nice people, sure.
Yeah.
Do you remember Casey used to be downtown? I can't remember his last name.
Was that the guy with the slick back hair?
Yeah,
Is that what his name was?
Casey.
He reminded me of one of the characters on the Munsters
Yeah,
on TV
yeah.
because his hair was slicked right back and shiny black, and he always wore this kind of tight black jacket and pants.
Like Eddie Monster.
Yeah, he was actually not a bad-looking guy.
And there was the other brothers I think about are they lived down this end of town. They lived across from Guzzy's store.
Oh, I know them.
There was
I knew them so well.
a couple
There
brothers.
was 3 of them.
Yes, that's right.
3 of them, and how could I can see them. One of them, it didn't matter whether it was winter or summer, he always wore a light brown cotton jacket to his waist, and a hat.
Yeah.
And in the winter, and they always walked.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking in the winter, seeing him walking in the snow and the cold, and thinking he's wearing the same jacket that he wears in the summer, but never seemed to bother him.
Evans brothers?
Evans, yeah, that's who it was. 3 of them. I remember 3 of them.
Yeah. And even in our end of town there was Kuvnik brothers. So Jersey and Pete had a place out there in Morrissey. And after when Annie's husband died, she moved in with them. I remember the Ivanos. There was one Ivano, he would talk like he was a politician, and the alcohol naturally was at the forefront.
Mrs. Vanna was a lovely, lovely woman, though. I believe she was Reno Lenardon's sister.
Don't know that.
Yeah. But you know, Fernie was quite a melting pot of nations, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The only thing we didn't have were black people.
My dad talked about somebody and he called him Danny Oliver. And he was supposed to be black.
I saw Chinese and, you know, all of the other nationalities, German, Italian. I mean, there was a lot of us Italians in the North End especially. We had people from the Slavic countries and lots of Italians, a few Germans, but I never ever saw anybody that was black until I was well in my 20s, late 20s in Fernie.
There was my dad called, there was an East Indian fella here, and I think his name was Bish.
Mm.
And he was by himself also. I don't remember too much about him, but I remember my dad talking about him.
Yeah, for some reason, growing up in Fernie, I grew up with no prejudice at all. I think maybe that was the good thing about being raised in Fernie.
Well, you gotta remember that generation went through a war, a couple wars, and the young people they knew went overseas, and a lot of them never come back. But people referred to each other by different slangs too. I mean, there was no politically right in that time either. They weren't shy about what they had to say about somebody.
And actually,
I don't think they're prejudiced.
no, and actually being raised in Fernie with an immigrant family, I was never critiqued because I was, an immigrant.
No.
I never felt any kind of, rudeness or nastiness from anybody. And probably that's one of the reasons why I love Fernie so much, because I never felt that.
Why do you would have accepted if somebody said something to you, you would just, like, who cares? Either that or you'd get in a fight with them.
Well, maybe I was fortunate, but I know that we never felt that we weren't part of the town.
Didn't worry about names. I don't think we worried.
Are there any memories at all that stick out in your mind aside from what we've discussed? Because by talking with you, I've remembered a lot of things myself. Is there anything that really stands out as to the way life was in Fernie? I recall the North End grounds.
I know that was a big deal on Labor Day.
Yeah.
And I remember Labor Day being like a real, you didn't know what the weather was going to be like. But again, the parade was the parade, and the parade.
It was a great parade, remember?
And it was so much. Everybody came downtown, and then I remember there was always sports at the grounds. But I remember, like I said, my dad and the guys that worked. They worked hard and they played hard, and they went for beers. That's all there was to it. And I remember going to the grounds, and I remember a big stand down there that you'd crawl up on and you'd watch the sports.
And
like
it was at least 20 feet high.
Had to be.
Yeah.
And the soccer was quite a thing. I remember
Lots of ball.
lots of baseball.
Yeah.
It was quite a weekend, actually.
And when the circus came, they put up the big tent. That's where they did it.
I actually remember when they Jimmy White smoked the peace pipe, and when they gathered and
Over
lifted the
there.
curse, and
Yeah.
he smoked the peace pipe, and I was watching a documentary on the Ghost Rider, how it is, and they said they didn't believe in stuff like that, and they didn't do curses, but Jimmy White died about 6 months after he smoked that pipe.
And the legend is that when the curse was removed, it had to go somewhere, and it went into James White.
Yeah,
And
nobody.
6 months later, he died.
Yeah, I remember that was quite a hoopla down there. I remember that the bars would close at 6, and my mom and my dad and I would go for supper either in the King Edward, or we would go to the grill for Chinese food, whatever. And then my dad might come with us, or he may not. And if on Saturday, like I said, we played outside. I know personally, I've been on top of every building downtown. We would
On top
climb
of the buildings?
on top of all the buildings. We would play up there.
How did you get up there?
Well, there was ladders, and we had ways to get up there, and a lot of the inside of the lobbies had like trapdoors, and you'd bring the ladder down and then go up. There's lots of kids. We'd play up there. I remember the night before Halloween called Gate Night. That was pretty exciting, just to have the adults and the 2 policemen and a couple firemen chasing us guys around town. And
Do you know how that night got called? Gate Night?
no idea.
I was told that it was because in West Fernie especially, they would tear the gates, they would remove the gates and throw them away. Or they would actually, because there was a lot of porta potty, well, you know, like
Outhouses.
outside place, they weren't portable, they were up there all the time,
Yeah.
that they would knock them down, and at times there would be people in them.
This
When
end
they-
of town had them.
Yeah,
I remember.
even here?
Around here, because I remember us guys would go have a smoke in them, and then one time the just about lit it on fire. I remember the smoke coming out, and we had a hell of a time getting it out.
Well, even as, I think the last 10 years especially, there's been no activity at gates, on
No.
gate night at all. But I remember years ago waking up and finding eggs all over my window.
Yeah.
And downtown, you know, really, you know, eggs and garbage and kids, but thankfully, kids are past that.
I think what happened is our parents talked about it, and I think as young people we emulated what they talked about, how much fun they had. And I think in a lot of ways we went too far, and I remember we would get garbage cans and we'd tie a little bit of rope between them, and I remember we would get the policemen or the fire department that time, and their volunteers would chase us guys around, which was perfect. And we would run past the barrels, but the car would drive in between the barrels, and the rope would tighten up, and the barrels would slap against the vehicle, and the water would come out of the vehicle, and everybody in there would get a wash.
Oh, wow.
But I think what happened too is I didn't talk to my children about gate night, and I remember everything that I did improperly. It was because my dad and the other people would talk about these times, and we would carry that on. We would keep it going, right? And then
Well, as an immigrant family, we did not have
no,
that information.
No.
But I do recall in school, you know, them saying, "Oh, it's gay night, we gotta be careful, you gotta leave all the lights out, you gotta make sure, you know, and look out." So we'd be peering out the window to see if anybody was coming to do any damage, and really they didn't.
no,
Except, as I said, a few eggs
yeah, there was,
at the window.
Yeah,
Only once.
I think the other thing I miss was when they took away Labor Day and they went to Fernie Friendship Days.
Yeah.
Everything fell apart because the group that organized that collapsed. I think the way of life that we knew, the beginning came to an end when Kaiser came.
Yes, that's right.
Because the majority of people here were not
Oh.
staying.
Hang on to your thought.
What I believe where all the change came was when Kaiser came and give us opportunities, because if you didn't work in the bush or you didn't work for Knight's Lumber Company, the mentality was the same in Michelle, Natal, Coleman. I'm sure of this. You need to go somewhere else.
Mhm.
You need to do better for
Yeah.
yourself. And all the young people would finish school and they would leave.
Mass exodus, yeah.
And when that become obvious to me was they had a reunion here. They had organized, and I talked to many people that had lived here before, and they told me the same thing. There was nothing here to hold them here, and that's why they all went to the cities and they went to other places. And I don't know that they were any better off, but maybe that's why there was just bachelors left when I was growing up here. Maybe that's why a lot of the old families, once the business failed, nobody took it over. I think the way of life, nobody liked change, but I'm not sure Fernie would be what it is without the mines.
I agree.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah, because when the mines went down, and they have done that
Couple
several times, the town dies.
Yeah.
And although now, thankfully, we have a tourist economy,
Mhm.
I'm not sure if the tourism economy could support in the same way as the mining sector does financially.
I think the only people that really get supported in the tourism industry is the people at the bottom of the food chain still make a minimal wage and they wouldn't be taken care of.
Excuse
But
me.
the person running the show, i.e. if you had the helicat ski and it was your game, then you would do okay. But saying all that, I don't think raw resources, is still a better answer. I don't think we should be so blind to believe that we can put all our thing in tourism.
I think that for Fernie to continue, it needs to have balance.
Well, sure.
And, talking about young people, all my growing up years, and even after graduation, everybody left, and I stayed behind because I got married. And there were very few young people because, as you said, as soon as they graduated, everybody left. They were left for school, and then they found jobs elsewhere, and they didn't come back. But now, Fernie is known as a really young town, and the majority of the citizens here are young people. And so we've gone from being a town where there were no young people for a long time to now being the majority of young people. It's really done a shift.
Yeah, to see the young families, to see the children in our town, to see the problems they have at IDS, with children more and more. There's no sign of that weakening. There's none of that. There's no sign of people are going to exodus. It's our age group that are leaving here because
It's true.
we want to move closer to the hospital, like the regional. It's good to go there, I guess, but you got to realize you're going to be by yourself when you go there.
And I think a lot of people are moving the senior age, whether we like it or not. They say you become a senior as soon as you hit 50. So people 55 and older that are moving, especially those in their 60s and 70s, they're moving because they can sell their house here in Fernie and go elsewhere and buy a house maybe even bigger and better than what they had and still have money in the bank. And so that's been a big draw for people to leave. The other is housing. A lot of these seniors don't want their big houses. They want a house that's one floor. At least this is what I've been told over the years, and that is those kind of homes aren't available in Fernie. Now, maybe it's happening, there are a few more being built, but for the most part, I think a lot of the seniors have moved. And not only was it because of medical services being closer to them, but also because they were able to sell their houses for a really good amount.
I remember Alan Cairns and his sister lived here. Gotta get out of Fernie, gotta go to Cranbrook.
Mm-hmm.
Better health care, better climate, all the rest, la-di-da, la-di-da. But he would walk the Cranbrook Mall, hoping he could talk to some Fernie people.
And I did see him quite a few times.
And he
we
was
chatted.
lonely. What I found at this part of my life, which seems to be really good, most of my children are gone out of here. Most of my grandchildren aren't here anymore. I just got a couple here. But if I have the need or want to socialize, I know where I can find people.
Yes.
And we go back and we talk like me and you are talking now a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. And I go and I gravitate to different groups now. I don't have the need to be by myself or
Mm-hmm.
want. And I thought if I ever left here, that's what would happen.
Well, it's really hard to integrate into a new town and find friends, because when you're young, you have children in school, so right away you get to know all the parents. You become part of that scene, and so you get to know people. Your children are involved with sports, so you get to know people. At this age, your children are gone. My children are gone as well. And so if I moved to Cranbrook, say for instance, I would have to start all over again. And so how do I get to know people?
Yeah.
And so it is tough, and the socialization part of it is really very important for humanity, for humans too. They need that we need it. We need to be able to have friends that you can call and you can spend time with. It's not enough just to go shopping.
No. A prime example of that was the celebration they had last weekend at Holy Family, where I knew everybody in that room.
Yeah.
And it was nice, and it was nice to talk to people.
Mm-hmm.
We just talked. We the food was good,
Mm-hmm.
and the music was good, but the camaraderie was good. And I think home in a lot of cases is wherever you make it, but I'm really comfortable here, and I like having no intention of going anywhere.
Well, I'm with you. I will be here, and I will be buried up at St. Margaret's with my parents.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Joe, I really appreciate you coming and talking to me. We could probably talk for another hour with, but we covered a lot of ground on how Fernie used to be and how, Fernie today is a pretty nice place to be.
Mm-hmm.
We've modernized, and it's a little bit different, and there's older people that maybe don't like the patios and, don't like some of the things, but in actuality, Fernie is a pretty busy town, and it's a great place to live.
We gotta quit thinking what's just good for us. We need to think what's good for lots of people.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, so that change is gonna happen whether we like it or not.
Yes, and you and I sat on council together, and I think, especially you and I, because we were here the longest, we remember what Fernie was like, and we really appreciate the way Fernie is now, and appreciate what we have. And I think also, as a council, we really tried to think of everybody, every age group, every demographic, just to make sure that there's something for everybody.
Yeah.
Of course, in doing that, you don't please a lot of people, but it's okay. Still, we tried our best to do what we could for the town.
I think what was important is that the values we held weren't just our values, they were values for others. And the community was probably always at the forefront, no matter what.
Always.
I recognize that they wanted out with the old and in with the new, but we'll see. We'll see where that takes them, and maybe that's just another part of our moving on.
Oh yeah, growth, change.
Yeah.
It's inevitable. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really, really appreciate you being here, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Bye-bye.